Hey guys, so I've been reading some of your comments, and weirdly there's a small group of people that seem to think that I hate Game of Thrones, which I mean is ridiculous. Like, if I hated it, why would I put this many videos out about it? I mean, there's plenty of TV shows that exist out there that have just terrible writing all the way through, and you don't see me complaining about them all the time. But the real reason why I keep fixating on the show is how far it fell from where it originally was. And the real reason why Game of Thrones fell so far from its peak was just because it got stupider. And I don't just mean the writing got stupider, because that's a whole different video in and of itself. But I mean literally, the characters got stupider. So we're going to talk about the peak of Game of Thrones and why characters just getting dumber just kind of ruined the end of the show. Here we go. So guys, if we're going to talk about where Game of Thrones peaked, it seems pretty clear to me, and that is Season 4. Season 4 is quite possibly the best season of Game of Thrones, and really early on it throws a new wrench into Game of Thrones, because despite the fact that Game of Thrones regularly kills off main characters, Season 4 is one of the first times where it kills off an extremely major character in the second episode of the season. By this point, fans have gotten really used to characters dying towards episode 9 and episode 10, but to see a main character, a character that had been there since the beginning, die in episode 2 was just the shakeup we needed in order to make sure that people were still on the edge of their seat when watching the show. And yet this was not the only shakeup that Season 4 did, because Season 4 gave us what was possibly the biggest reveal in the entire show. And that is who was actually behind everything. Because since the beginning, Game of Thrones has basically always just been about the Lannisters versus the Starks. The Lannisters were the villains who, like Cersei, had unfairly taken the throne, and the Starks were the ones on the side of justice. But Season 4 completely throws that out, where in Episode 5 we get the huge reveal that the Lannisters didn't do anything wrong.
What wife would trust you the way I've trusted you? When you gave me those drops and told me to pour them into John's wine, my husband's wine.
I mean, she was still lying about who her children were, and then successfully managed to assassinate the king, which, by the way, that boar was the most convenient thing since a rat that understands time machines. Because really, if that boar didn't manage to kill Robert in Season 1, the show would have been a lot shorter. But anyways, Season 4 basically reestablishes who the real villains of the show were, and moves Littlefinger from being a small background player to being possibly the greatest antagonist of the show.
Only one. My entire life. Your sister.
And with Tywin's major strategic win in Season 3, we have two of the biggest, most intelligent strategists the show ever has really coming into their own in the same season. I mean, Tyrion had done a great job defending King's Landing in the Battle of the Blackwater, but when Tywin shows up, he appears to be at a completely different level of playing the game. Despite repetitively losing battles in the war against Robb Stark, he manages to guarantee their victory through nothing but sheer politics and cunning alone. And Tywin's scheme is even more cunning in the books because of the whole Jane Westerling plotline, which I'm not really going to go into, but if you guys want to discuss that in the comments, then, you know, I'll meet you there. But tragically, at the end of Season 4 of Game of Thrones, Tywin dies. Which is a tragic loss for the show, because it takes away one of the greatest strategists and replaces him with basically Cersei. And Cersei really does live up to her character as Season 4 has redefined her. Because once we find out that Cersei wasn't the person who killed Jon Arryn and wasn't the one manipulating everything this whole time, it really reframes what Cersei has actually done. And we notice that her character tends to be a lot more impulsive and short-sighted.
Did it ever occur to you that I might be the one who deserves your confidence and your trust? Not your sons, not Jaime or Tyrion, but me. Did it ever occur to you that your daughter might be the only one listening to them, living by them? That she might have the most to contribute to your legacy?
Cersei, once she is handed all the power after her father dies, uses that power to remilitarize the Faith, because she believes that the Faith will surely support Tommen and will basically guarantee her power. And she attempts to use this connection to the Faith and the High Sparrow in order to undermine the Tyrells. Of course, a better strategist would have realized that giving the Faith so much power in the capital really diminishes your own, especially when you're giving that power to fanatics who really believe in their cause above all else. And this of course backfires on her when the fate turns on her for all the things that she has done, which of course causes her to do more and more drastic things until she eventually just needs to wipe the board clean, which in so doing immediately removes the Tyrells from King's Landing and basically her only opponent in the capital. Which sounds like a great thing on paper, but from a storytelling perspective, basically ended the show. Because when we get to the end of Season 6 of Game of Thrones, all the threads have come to an end. Arya, who had finished her training with the Faceless Men at the end of Season 4, has just returned to Westeros. Bran, who went up north to become a tree wizard, has finally started his journey back down south. And the biggest reveal of all of Game of Thrones, one the fans had speculated on since the very beginning, Jon is finally confirmed to be Lyanna's son. And it's when we get to Winds of Winter, where all these events happen, the show runs out of material. I mean, you figure that this was what everything was leading up to. The great crescendo that was Winds of Winter has finally led us to here. And this really should be the peak of the show, when every single chess piece is finally in position and we can finally get to the end game. And yet it's not. Because we get to Season 7 and Season 8, and it's all over. Because all the storylines have just gotten to their end. There's nothing left for them to do. And there's no one who exemplifies this more than Littlefinger. Littlefinger, who in Season 4 had finally climbed all the way up from being a lowly brothel owner in King's Landing, and now he was the Lord and Protector of the Vale. At the end of Season 6, he has also helped to retake the North, which basically gives Littlefinger power over 2 different kingdoms, making him one of the most powerful people in all of Westeros. And yet for all of Season 7, Littlefinger basically doesn't do anything. I mean, he tries to create some tension between the Stark sisters, but why? This is a guy who had been creating entire wars, entire conflicts between huge houses in order to get his way. And at Season 7, it seems like the greatest scope of his ability is to stir conflict between 2 sisters? For a guy who claimed that he wanted to sit on the Iron Throne back in Season 1, it really seems like he doesn't have a plan in order to get there anymore. In fact, seriously, try to come up with any way for Littlefinger to get from where he is at the end of Season 6 to the Iron Throne. I mean, there is none. Trust me, I've been thinking about this for a long time. There is no connection between where Littlefinger ends up after he's taken the North and the Iron Throne. There's just no path between these points. And for a character like Littlefinger, who is so methodical, who thinks so far in advance, the fact that he seems to have no plan after capturing the North just makes him stupider. I mean, we're talking about a guy who killed Jon Arryn in order to become the Lord Protector of the Vale 4 seasons later. And you're saying this same guy who had these long strategic plans, who was masterfully manipulating everything in the shadows, just ran out of ideas? Well, let me tell you, I don't think Littlefinger is the one who ran out of ideas. And then, of course, there's Tyrion, who had been a great strategist the entire time, who by the time we get to the end of the show is really failing at doing anything. He's basically not helpful to Queen Daenerys or the Northern cause at all. And his only real major contributions to the finale of Game of Thrones is convincing Jon to kill Daenerys and somehow electing their new king. I mean, I guess the real issue here is there is a difficulty in writing smart characters. See, in order for characters to appear to be smart and well written, there needs to be a lot of forethought. You need to be able to see what their goal would be in the end, and then place in these small amounts of foreshadowing that lead to that goal. And while everything going into Game of Thrones, pretty much up until the end of Season 6, really did feel like where those characters' plotlines were headed, all the material that the books had, all the material that George R.R. Martin had set up, had just basically ended at one point, leaving it on the back of those writers to continue their story to its natural conclusion. And therefore, without really knowing exactly the exact scripts of the last 2 seasons, it's really hard to make characters seem smarter. Because once you're at the point where you're writing episodes in basically an episodic nature, every character will seem more short-sighted because of the lack of long-term planning. And despite the fact that Game of Thrones really did need more time in order to finish the story, a bigger issue in the last 2 seasons of Game of Thrones was that all the master strategists that we had seen throughout the earlier seasons basically stopped planning anything. But anyways, guys, that's just what I'm thinking. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.